Kyle here from All Media Reviews, here to continue the Albums of the Year series. Kind of quite a lot, 1969 to go through, and I'm kind of up against the clock a little bit, so I'm going to kind of zip through some of this. So, I have 19 albums here. I don't have any honorable mentions, so I'm just going to be talking about something I can show, something I can't show, of course. 19, the debut album from Genesis to Revelation. You know, they were just a pop band, pretty much, psych pop. When the sour turns to sweet would be my go-to. That's the first track on here. But, you know, they were quite a different band, of course, at this point. They were just kids at school. Anyway, number 19. Number 18, I have it on CD somewhere, but I couldn't I couldn't find my copy. But Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band, Trout Mask Replica, famous, renowned, produced by Frank Zappa, of course. Like early rap in some ways. It's weird. I mean, I've probably not listened to it since I got the CD. I think it was when I was in high school or just after, in like the mid-90s. Maybe it may have been earlier, maybe like 93. I think it was. Anyway, number 18. Number 17, Volume 2 from Soft Machine, which I bought many years ago, and there's the following record I'm much more familiar with, but you know, I think this is maybe a step up from their debut album, but again, I can't talk a ton about it musically. You know, they were part of the Canterbury scene. This is when prog was starting, so, but I do have a copy. I would see it frequently. I just picked it up when I was looking for third. I would see, you know, Volume 2 or the second record. So, number 16, again, I don't have a copy. Jethro Tull's Stand Up, which includes the instrumental piece Bourrée, or Bourrée. I think it's best known for that song, but I've only listened to it like a couple times. I know there was like a remaster version that included their single Living in the Past, which I don't know if it was on in the proper... There was a compilation that had Living in the Past. Anyway, that's number 16. That was 16. So 15, the self-titled debut album from Yes, with, you know, this is the Tony Kaye, Peter Banks Yes, which includes Beyond and Before, Yesterday and Today, Every Little Thing, Sweetness, and Survival. Sweetness, I think of for Buffalo 66, I've mentioned many times. They play in the credits. Survival was one of the first Yes songs I ever heard on that Highlights compilation that I have. But anyway, not a bad record, but they would do, obviously, much better things to me. So, that's 15. Number 14, I think I have a copy on cassette, but I've always been shy. I've shied away from buying it on vinyl and even CD. Ummagumma, which the live stuff, even though it was not in front of a crowd, the live material on it from the first, couple albums is great. The studio stuff, you know, Several Species with a Pict, Grantchester Meadows. I've never gravitated toward that much. Although I know in Shadow Gallery's Floating Memories they referenced it. So anyway, that's number 14. Number 13, the debut album from Renaissance. Like 68, there were a lot of bands that did self-titled albums, like Yes. And Renaissance, you know, of course, Renaissance was more blues rock. This is with Jane Ralph and Keith Ralph, still coming on the ashes of the Yardbirds, of course. But it's decent, but again, it's like Yes, a lot of these bands, they would go on to do things I would enjoy much more. But anyway, that's the self-titled album from Renaissance. And I have it on CD in that bin right there, but, you know, when I have the vinyl, I'll show the vinyl. It's number 13. Number 12, this probably should be a little higher, but I gotta admit that I found this for like $3 at, I think it was at Half Price Books many years ago, even on sale. But the self-titled Chicago album, Chicago Transit Authority. And Chicago's a band that I've always felt like I would like to like more. And I've listened to some parts of a lot of the records. A lot of the records are not short, but this is when they were more progressive and less about doing pop songs. It's a double album, too, which is not that common. You know, of course, you had Frank Zappa doing Freak Out. The White Album had come out around that same time, the year before. But so it wasn't that weird, I suppose, for Chicago to put out, I think they're just known as Chicago Transit Authority, at the point this came out for their debut album, to put out a double album. And I know they did. I don't know how many double albums they have, Chicago. They have many. So, they're especially among their first, like, 5 or 10. So, anyway. That's number 12. Number 11. This record would probably be... I'll have to just cover it up a little bit. a little bit higher if I included this version. When I include this version, which didn't come out, this is the legacy or the deluxe edition of the Blind Faith album, which, you know, the great thing about this version, I got this late 90s or early 2000s, I forget when I bought it, is it has those 4 jams on the second side, and I've always wanted to, I haven't bought the vinyl, but I've wanted to find if they ever issued, and they probably have, the vinyl for a reasonable price. Here it is. The 4 different jams. Because I have this at number 11, it'd be in the top 7 at least. I don't know if it would be in the top 5, but there's one of these pieces. I want to say it's slow jam number 1. Basically uses an interval pattern that that would later be used by Yes on Heart of the Sunrise and Rush on, I want to say, the Necromancer. And I've also concluded, I think the Mars Volta did it on Francis the Mute. That da 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 da. I could be wrong. I haven't listened to it long, but the jams are where the real good. I mean, there's a couple of hits. They had a couple minor hits. Blind Faith, of course, was a supergroup after Cream broke up. Clapton formed the supergroup with, I believe, Traffic, also with Steve Winwood. And of course, it does have Ginger Baker on drums, and Rick Gretsch on bass, and Find Your Way Home, I think it is, the one that was their sort of minor hit. But unfortunately, like a lot of projects that Clapton did, they had a short life. You know, Cream didn't last that long. He wasn't in the Yardbirds that long. I mean, actually, you could think about Kevin Gilbert's career in some ways, and the belief about Can't Find My Way Home. Yeah. Sea of Joy is decent, you know. Sleeping in the Ground, the slow bird, you know, Acoustic Jam. I think it was like on paper supposed to be this amazing thing, and it was good, but it just wasn't meant to be. As much as I love what they did, especially on the jams, the jams. So it would be higher if you include the jams. It might even be in the top 5. I mean, when I listen to this, and it's been a long time since I listen to the jams. I don't listen to the standard album that often, so. Anyway, that's number 11. Number 10, again, Fairport Convention, Legion Leaf, which is a classic folk rock album. I know Sandy Denny, of course, would later, like 2 years later maybe, would be on Zeppelin's Battle of Evermore. But I checked it out from the library many years ago and I really liked it, although I didn't get obsessed with it. But the 2 singles, Reynardine, or 3 of them, Matty Grooves and Tamlin. I mean, it was really English folk music, but combining that with rock music. I mean, kind of like Fleetwood Mac at the same time, which I don't have any of the early Fleetwood Mac on my list, sadly. But, which, maybe I'll do a redux and I'll include some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's a renowned record. I mean, again, I'm probably not nearly as familiar with it as I should be, but that's why it's number 10 and not as high. So, number 9 is Pink Floyd's More, the soundtrack, which I like, obviously, a fair amount more, no pun intended, than Ummagumma. But my go-to, this is the soundtrack to the movie of the same name, which I did see the movie years ago. My go-tos are the Nile song, which doesn't sound like Pink Floyd at all. It's like the heaviest. It's like, you know, I mean, it wasn't metal, but it does not resemble Pink Floyd at that point, earlier, and even later that much. Because Gilmore's vocals are weird on that. You know, you don't recognize his voice, assuming he's done the lead vocals. Cymbeline. Cymbeline is one of my go-tos. Green is the color. You know, it is a soundtrack, so I mean, the soundtrack has Party Sequence, and I just realized the sleeve is not doing the best. I want to say there's 1 or 2 tracks I'm not even noticing on here, but yeah. It's not my favorite Pink Floyd record, but I think it's a little underrated and not credited. I think, to me, I like it more than Saucerful, if I did a Pink Floyd ranking, which I will hopefully someday, but anyway. So that was number 9. Number 8, again, I don't have a copy, but is Crosby, Stills, and Nash, without Neil Young. Their debut album, which, like Blind Faith, was the result of a bunch of members wanting to form a new band after the Ashes, or just wanting to form a new band. Many of their hits, Sweet Judy, Blue Eyes, which is sort of progressive folk in some ways. Fantastic vocal harmonies on that. Guinevere, Wooden Ships is another sort of progressive song in some ways. Great harmonies. Helplessly Hoping. Those are kind of my. It's got, you know, there were bonus tracks that included like Teach Your Children, because they probably released a fair amount of singles as well. Because I mean, Crosby, Stills and Nash / Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young only had like 3 proper albums, maybe one after that. But that early late '60s, early '70s, of course, they did Deja Vu not that long after, and I believe Deja Vu is the album that has the song Woodstock, because I know they like wrote the song almost for the festival or something like that. But anyway, we'll talk about that when we talk about that album. So moving on to number 7, again another one I don't have a copy of. Miles Davis is In a Silent Way. I've always kind of favored it over Bitches Brew, which is an album that came out like the year after, I believe, or around the same time. Even though the lineup's pretty similar. A lot of the fusion people cite Bitches Brew as the more, you know, important record. I just think the two pieces are more listenable, and it's less free jazz, although they're kind of repetitive in some ways. But you can hear some of the inklings of where both Mahavishnu and Return to Forever would go with Chick Corea and John McLaughlin on that record. So yeah, it's kind of one of my go-tos for Miles Davis. Number 6, The Who's Tommy. So some people love this album. Some people think it's overrated. I think it's kind of slightly overrated, but it's still a great record. Again, like Chicago's debut album, it was a double album. The first kind of, you know, they took what they were trying to do initially with the quick one and decided, let's make a quick one while he's away and make a full album out of that about a deaf, dumb, and blind guy. Yeah, everyone knows the story. You know, from a track standpoint, it has many of my favorites between Amazing Journey. Amazing Journey might be my favorite song on here. Sparks, of course, real Keith Moon featured piece. Pinball Wizard, everyone's heard a million times, but it still holds up. See Me, Feel Me, I'm Free. There's a few, I mean, you know, it's the rock opera element to it, and then you see the Ken Russell film, gets to me a little more. But I still think the story element might hurt it a little more, and that's why I don't listen to it as much, and I prefer another one of the rock operas. But still a pretty classic album in the Who canon, classic rock canon, and the influence it had on concept albums and everything like that. So, The Who's Tommy at number 6. So now the top 5. Again, I don't have actually possession of a physical copy, but Frank Zappa's Hot Rats, which I just revisited the other day and remembered how much I liked it. It's known best for the opening track, Peaches and Regalia, which is a fantastic piece, even though it's only like 3 minutes and change. Willie the Pimp is awesome, especially the guitar work on that. The track after that, Son of Mr. Green Jeans, another terrific, you know, fusiony. It really, you compare it to Miles Davis, or maybe it had an influence. He was probably listening to a lot of like Miles and you know, some of the more kind of adventurous jazz that was happening, because it really is a jazz fusion record. I mean, it is blues rock too. He's probably listening to a lot of Hendrix too at that time when Zappa wrote it, but it also came out the same day as another record I'm about to talk about. It's interesting. So yeah, I mean, is it my favorite Zappa record? Arguably it might be, you know, because the problem I have with Zappa is a lot of his albums, a lot of his music is about humor attempts, and it's dry humor that doesn't do a lot for me. But when his instrumental sections work, they really work. I actually think I've come to conclude that, like, I would rather just hear the instrumental parts of his music. The vocals, you know what, I can pass on. So, all right. So that was number 5, right? If I'm keeping track here, not losing track here. Yes, number 4. It's really splitting hairs between the next 2. Led Zeppelin 2. You know, not my favorite Zeppelin album, but it's classic. It's got, you know, Ramble On, which is an all-time classic. Bring It On Home. What Is and What Should Never Be. Whole Lot of Love is the one song in here, and maybe Heartbreaker to an extent I'm burnt out on a little bit, but it's Livin' Lovin' Maid I like, even though the radio plays that a lot, and the Lemon song. Thank You I love. Thank You is another, even though it's a ballad. And Moby Dick is decent. I mean, it's a drum piece, a drum featured piece basically. It's bonzo. So yeah, I mean, it's, as I said, I split hairs with the first, basically the first 6 or 7 Zeppelin albums, basically their whole studio catalog. I can go back and forth between most of them. So that's number 4, and number 3, of course, is also Zeppelin, the first Zeppelin album that came out earlier in the year, which I mean, You Shook Me and Can't Quit You Baby are probably the only two that I'm so on. I don't need to hear, but Good Times, Bad Times, Communication Breakdown is decent, but I love Good Times, Bad Times. Of course, it's got How Many More Times, which is a blues rock classic, little Robert Anthony. I know it references some other blues pieces in there, so of course it's like a cover. Of course, they've been through that. Dazed and Confused, everyone knows that. Of course, they named the movie after it, and the live version from on Song Remains the Same is epic. But it's maybe the heaviest Zeppelin song, Dazed and Confused. And Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. It's unbelievable. The Spanish guitar and the build, that dun 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 dun. I never get sick of that. So, all right. So that's number 3. Number 2, going on to the top 2 here, the debut album from the one and only King Crimson, the most recognizable King Crimson, one of the most recognizable progressive rock albums, of course. The only album to feature Michael Giles and Ian McDonald. I went to the King Crimson documentary. I saw it again last night. My go-tos, the whole record's pretty close to perfect. It's not a perfect record, but I don't mind Moonchild. Even a lot of people don't like Moonchild. I think it goes on too long. But I love In the Court, Epitaph, of course, and of course 21st Century Schizoid Man. I mean, the ending of 21st Century I love. I Talk to the Winds, the only other sort of song that doesn't quite live up to, or doesn't compare to some of the other classics, but they were very original, very unique when they came out, fusing jazz and like heavier sound. They influenced metal, of course, but anyway. And number 1, of course, my in effect my top Beatles album, Abbey Road. Love the side, whatever, side 2 suite, although I've come to learn to remember and not discount the fact it's actually not a suite until you start on You Never Give Me Your Money. The first 2 songs, Here Comes the Sun and Because, are not part of the suite. Love those 2 tracks. Every song on here, this is a perfect record to me. Something, Come Together, Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Octopus's Garden is maybe the weakest track, but I still like it. The suite, Golden Slumbers Carry That Weight. Those 2 just are so big. Polythene Pam. Part of it was seeing Transatlantic incorporate it, and also seeing Collective Unconscious play it live. Kind of got me more in love with this album and everything like that. So, yeah, I have Abbey Road at number 1. I love King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King, but if push comes to shove, this is still my favorite record from '69. So that's about it. Yeah. What are your top 5, 10, 15, 20 albums from 1969? I'm sure I'm missing stuff. Like I said, this is all a work in progress. I think I might eventually have the interest to do another version of these lists in a few years if I'm still making YouTube videos, assuming at that point. Just because I feel like there's a lot of music from these eras that I either know only vaguely or don't even know. Like I said, like Fleetwood Mac. And, there are a lot of bands that put out albums in the 60s that I didn't include on my list that, I think of the 60s for the singles. It was starting to become an albums era. The 70s is where it became albums, and then switched back to singles in the 80s, and then the underground stuff basically allowed you to have albums at that point. So, but anyway, that's my take on 1969, the albums of the year from 1969. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Please leave a comment, give it a like, and leave your list below, and we'll see you next time.